Hey, Cozy Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about harmonic rhythm. I have this solo piano piece, and as you first glance at this project file, you might be going, whoa, it's just a piano. Well, this is all stuff for a video. This is mastering, and then this is the composition. It's just that top part, so it's actually all in one pattern. I wrote it in a library after I did not do so hot on a test, so I needed so I had to do something. So I did this, and I'll play for you the first little bit, and then we'll talk about the rhythmic ideas behind it. Okay, so we see that I'm messing with there's a lot of rhythmic ideas, and it's also very harmonically based. And so the track is called Pick Up. It's on my YouTube channel. If you look up just Pick Up, Composing Gloves, it should pop up. And let's talk about this. So I have this pulsing eighth note thing. It goes do 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 do. But then I have this larger rhythm, basically a two measure ideal. And it becomes much more obvious when I get over here and I'm like, oh, two measure notes, two measure note, two measure note, two measure note. And so, but they're separated. Well, the two measure notes are separated is what I mean to say. So you see, oh, so this isn't quite two measures. It's a little less than two measures. But you see that they're going on, and they become a very big statement, right? They become a big statement at measure 23. So if you've ever looked up Philip Glass, I'm a huge Philip Glass guy. Like when I heard his first stuff, I was like his minimalistic style, I was like completely fascinated by it. I think it's some of the coolest stuff ever. He's written lots of film scores. Go check him out. He writes stuff that's very like this. There's a game on the Xbox. I forgot what it's called, but it's like a puzzle game, and you put these puzzles together. And what's cool is you put the pieces in, it'll read the pieces as notes and will actually add notes to the music. And he wrote a tune for that. That's awesome too. Every song in that game was really cool. I believe it's called Chime. I don't totally remember though. So I could go play it and figure it out. So what I have here though is I set up this very obvious meter, this very obvious thing. But you see here I have a measure of crescendoing down here and a measure of decrescendo. And I came in here and I changed notes and gave myself an interesting harmonic structure because to me that's very important. It's not quite as extreme as some of the minimalistic stuff he's done. But if I highlight these notes, you can see which ones they are. And so you see we have this up and down, up and down, up and down. Some are very similar, probably even exactly the same maybe. Looks like these might be the same. But you see I add in these notes too here. So I have this sort of note that's sort of pulsing in the middle. And then we've got these guys, which you can notice are much softer. They're the red dots down there. And they're just sort of like undertones, just like this idea, this like, I don't know, urge is the way I sort of see it, sort of coming up and out, and it gets just sort of tense, and then it just releases. And then finally you hit these downbeats that are like boom, 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 like those sorts of things. And those things to me are just, these are like the coolest notes in the whole thing. Like I just think these are so cool. We do have these notes up here, which are basically acting as a sort of like a subdivision type deal, but I'm already subdividing, so I don't need to worry about that. As we've talked about in previous videos, these are just little notes on the top to make it interesting to listen to more. These are more expressions of sort of like what I was feeling sort of at that time. And so this song just sort of came out. It wasn't hard to write this. Some of you guys who are real technical, but I mean like I was in a good emotional state to write something like this. Because sometimes I struggle with writing stuff that's sort of simple, and maybe some of you don't think this is simple, but to me, capturing just raw emotions amazingly harder than just understanding technical difficulties. So we have this going on, and then we reach these notes, right? And so these are like the big two measure notes. And what I'm doing is I'm augmenting what's going on. So I have this measure thing going on, measure up, measure down. But then I have this like up, 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 up. And then I go back to that a little bit, and then I repeat that again. You see over here, it gets a little more dense. But this is actually something a piano player could play. This part right here would definitely be the hardest part, though. So let's talk about these. So right here, I give extreme emphasis to one when these notes hit, and I rely on its decay and carrying time to carry you to the next note, where I again give that same emphasis. So I build like this sort of like implied meter that lasts over 2 bars. Well, this is like 1 2 1 2 rather than 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. And these guys sort of just subdivide it for you. They're like the boat that carries you on the waves of the water. The waves are like these big waves that are smooth and big and whoosh. And then these guys are like they're like the boat. You're riding on the boat. The boat might go up and down a lot more than the giant wave, but it rides this big wave, so it carries you through the next part. So whenever you're writing a rhythm of any sort of kind, any sort of thing like this, where you put these notes would drastically change how these things are perceived. And so there's a spot where I actually exit this at the very end, and I add in these guys, and a lot more stuff happens here. It's a call from the first cry, I guess you could say, at the beginning. It's a reprise, and so it's a little bit of thing. And now we've got a couple notes going on with some additional harmony. So I change where things naturally lie, and in this case, nothing's too extreme. But I change where you're like where you expect things to be. You're like, oh, that's an unexpected harmony in subdivision. When I add notes, if those notes are of the same volume, that's going to add additional emphasis to whatever subdivision that's on. So what this is on the and of 1. So there's going to be an unusual emphasis there. I do it again. And over here, I do an unusual emphasis on the and of 2. And just by putting those notes there, I'm augmenting where it lies. So this is sort of a syncopation move over here. But then it goes back to what the beginning actually was. And there's a little more unusual stuff. And then it just... there's a long hold at the end. And so that's basically my 2 cents on when you put down meter. I just want you to be aware of what you could be doing to it. Like if we are missing these notes over here, let's do some of that. So let's just say that these were, muted. Whoops, sorry about that. Wrong button. So these are muted. They turn gray to indicate their muted state. Okay. So you see they're there, but our perception of where the pulse is and stuff, this is like greatly diminished. Like what happens right here, we're like, oh, so it's building again. It's actually still kind of interesting to listen to, but it's building again, but then there's no like emphasis on 1. And so if we were to put these back in, which we are going to do right now, if I hit the right button this time, do. Okay, here we go. So you see, we're giving back that sense. We're giving back, oh, wow, it changes the feel completely, where things lie, things like that. So it's very, very an interesting deal. So when you're writing out more complex stuff, obviously you just want to make sure that you write it to emphasize the beats where you want them to go. A lot of people write this really complex thing, and then in harmony, what you start out doing actually is you probably write your melody line first. So you write your soprano line, then you write your bass line, then you fill it in with your tenor and your alto, filling in the harmonies. Then you go in and you do your moves after you've decided your progression, of course, which you did before you write your line. So a lot of people will write their melody in the key or whatever, and then they'll write a chord progression based off that melody. Then they'll fill in the bass. and then they'll fill in those two middle parts, and then they'll use melodic interventions and stuff, or inventions. They'll change it up with some melody tools, and they'll make it this really interesting ornate thing. And then people think, oh wow, they had this interesting ornate thing in their head, and they didn't. They might have had aspects of it though. They might have had like, oh, I know I want to do this sort of a thing with that kind of a thing. Like I sometimes I just start singing out loud whatever's in my head, and I can hear four orchestras and the whole nine yards. It's as if it's right in front of me, and I have utter control of what anyone does. And learning how to get that down on paper was quite a challenge. And then a lot of times people can do this. Like, you probably can do this on some level. I can do it on some level. I'm not like at like the level where I can hear it and write down every single note right after, because I don't remember. Like, that's the biggest problem probably, is just not remembering. But when you have that, a lot of times, and something I discovered was, I thought I was hearing everything, and then I realized I wasn't. I was hearing, and then my brain, in your mind, you can do weird things, and you think you're hearing it all, but in reality, it's actually pretty foggy. You can't hear it all. And in some cases, it's not foggy, and you can hear it all. And so there's just this interesting thing. So when people say, oh, this is what's going on in my head, I say, great, freaking learn the technical aspects, and then you can get it down on paper. And that way, because that's all that anyone else really cares about, because they can't hear what's in your head unless you're like me and you're a weirdo who sings all the crap out loud, and it's like da 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 da. I'm just like going at it, and people are looking at me like I'm insane, but I am having the concert of my life. So if any of you guys have any questions about this, let me know. It's a pretty simple idea. You just put down notes and it changes where the beat lies, essentially. But it's good to see an example and how it can really augment something. And when you do it poorly, it can really just throw things off. Let me give you an example of just weird, poorly stuff. So let's just move this off onto some weird beat. Let's move it like that. Okay, now let's listen to it. So like that completely breaks a lot of rules like that we set up for ourselves. Our expectations have been totally smashed. And then this is not a case where I want to do anything near that. So that would be poor writing. And you might be saying, well, why would anyone do that? Well, usually newer people, or when you're writing on something, I don't know, you'll write out a complex line, and this will be a lot more hidden. It will be, because you'll have so many notes flying in all these different directions, it'll be a lot more tough to spot. So you got to know where your meter is and stuff if you want to write that complex thing without it getting in your way. If you have any questions, again, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.